and welcome to this next episode of Reflect. We're going to be looking a little bit at Leviticus chapter 6. In fact, if you correspond it with the Torah portions, it's chapters 6, 7 and 8 really. And the title of today's little thought is Fueling the Fire. Now, in a former life, I once worked at the York Railway Museum, and I did the tours for the public and some of the school groups that would come in, and we used to tour them around some of the famous steam engines there. And as we were showing them the parts of the steam engines, there was one part, the firebox inside, that the fireman would be shoveling the coal into it and the driver would be driving the engine. And I had to keep explaining to everyone that the job of the fireman isn't to put out the fires. Because often we think today as firefighters, they're putting out the fire. But no, back in the days of the steam engines, you had to have someone fueling the fire. And that was the job of the fireman. And today, in our passage, we have a fireman. Somebody who fuels the fires, who keeps them stoked. And these were the priests, the Kohanim. They were to keep the altar fires burning continuously. Let's have a look at 6, 12 to 13 of chapter 6 here. The fire on the altar must be kept burning. It must not go out. Every morning the priest is to add firewood and arrange the burnt offering on the fire and burn the fat of the fellowship offerings on it. The fire must be kept burning on the altar continuously. It must not go out. The previous section of this book of Leviticus, known as the Torah portion, which is usually read in the synagogues before this one, is concerned with the people who bring the offerings. But now, this section of the Torah addresses Aaron and his sons as the people who are going to conduct the sacrificial service. So what was that first part of the sacrificial service every day? They were obviously there in the temple area and they were meeting lots of different people. There were many duties for the priests to be engaged with. But what was the first thing they did? You've got all these fires going on all day, haven't you? And of course, your first job of the day, there's lots of ash. So the first job is to dispose of it. Think about, I don't know if you have an open log fire, coal fire today. Many people just have central heating. But back in the day, the first job was to go down to the kitchen and there'd be a fire glowing and you'd rake the old range or the fireplace, shake out the ash, and you'd get rid of that ash and be able to build a fire to bring heat to your house and to bring facilities for cooking for each day. We sort of forget about that. But that was the same kind of activity that the priest had to undergo. Picture this. It's very early in the morning. The tabernacle is there. And the priest, maybe even before the sun is up, makes his way through the camp and goes through the little curtained doorway and enters into the courtyard. And he goes up to the bronze altar and he attends to it. It's a place of sacrifice. And it has to be right, has to be clean, has to be ready so that it can take the fire for today and the offerings that the people are going to bring. It has to be ready for today's sacrifices. In verse 10, we read, the priest shall remove the ashes. Now, the word in Hebrew for remove isn't just take away. This is an interesting word. It means almost to lift up. So ceremoniously, you might imagine, the priest is going to take some of yesterday's ashes, scoop them up and lift them up, ceremoniously almost, and set them beside the altar, the Mizbeach. What can we learn from that then? What does the Bible have to teach us about this? He's scooping up yesterday's ashes, but not just removing them at this point. He does with the rest of the ashes, but the first scoop, he scoops it up and he actually places it on the floor of the courtyard east of the ramp that leads to the top of the altar? Well, I think that by placing a portion of yesterday's service next to today's service, he's making like a declaration. He's saying, today we will continue to serve God, just like yesterday. He's saying, yesterday you blessed us. Yesterday you gave us the means, the grace to be able to offer these sacrifices and bring the people near, and you want the actual area clear. And we're so glad that you blessed us yesterday, and you will do it today. Lord, look at yesterday's service. Look what you did yesterday. Each day, however, God requires new sacrifices. We're not to lean on the provision of yesterday. The priest each day would have enough people coming to him with guilt offerings, peace offerings, fellowship offerings, thank offerings. And the reason there's always ash in the fire, the reason there was always so much ash, was because God made provision yesterday. But it mustn't stay like that. Because the token of appreciation must continue on today. And I suppose it's the same for us. We must think we've got to be grateful for the Lord today. Yes, look what you did yesterday, Lord. Look what we offered to you. Look what you received. But it's placed there to remind us what you did yesterday. But we're not to dote on that. We need to bring our worship to the Lord today. And I suppose this is why the section of the Torah opens with command. Look in verse, I think it's verse 9 here. The Lord said to Moses, give Aaron and his sons this command, which is interesting. If you were reading the Hebrew text, you'd say, oh, that's strange. Why does God use the word command? Because elsewhere, God uses the word say. God said to Moses, say to the Israelites, ... amarta in Hebrew. Or God might also use the word daber, speak. But he doesn't say, and he doesn't say speak, he says command. And the sages, as they grapple with this text, they say, well, this is because there has to be a zeal in the service for God. A zeal to keep the fire burning. And that's why it's mentioned 3 times here. It's very, very important. Why would God say 3 times, keep the fire burning? Oh yeah, and do such and such and such and such, but keep the fire burning and do this and that. Don't let the fire burn out. Why does it say it 3 times? I think God is trying to bring an emphasis down here. The burnt offering is to remain on the hearth of the altar all night until morning. The fire must be kept burning in verse 9. In verse 12, the fire on the altar must be kept burning. And if that's not clear enough, we see it again. It must not be extinguished. When God called Moses, when he called Moshe, if you recall, what happened? What was the incident in which God first appeared to Moses? Do you recall? It was the burning bush. It kept consuming. It kept burning. And so there's this picture of our God, a consuming fire. But it doesn't consume those that draw near to God. It doesn't consume those that approach him with the right heart attitude. Our God is a consuming fire. He's a jealous God, desiring to have his people come close to him. And when we think of fire, we often think of the power of God, the purifying, atoning presence of God, and God's holy service. And all the more so with this sacred fire that we see in the book of Leviticus here. Offerings and fire and worshipping God who is sacred, who is holy. We see it here in the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And later, when that became superseded by the temple, and Solomon dedicates the temple, again, there are fires in the altar. The first job of the priests, even up to the days of Solomon, and even up to the days of Jesus, was to actually rake out the ash, say, look, Lord, Ta-da! Put that to the side, but today God is here. The presence of the Lord is here to atone, and that's what the present-day sacrifices were for at that time. Interesting that our text here says every morning. So it's not just an occasion, it's every morning. Boker baboker in Hebrew. Morning by morning. The Cohen was to kindle the wood. Not only that, of course, if you remember, there were actually two fires. It wasn't just that one. They also had the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, that menorah inside, that had also to be lit. So you have this oil-lit menorah with all of its lamps that mustn't go out either. But the oil would burn low, and so the job of the priest would also be to light those lights, top up the oil, so that would be kept burning, representing the presence of God in the Mishkan, the only source of light in an otherwise darkened room, that menorah. Speaking of the gentle, steady, humble, kind of continuous light. And then you couple that with the fire that burns. God is in the purpose of illuminating, and his brightness has to pierce through into our own lives as well. It's so interesting when you think of the purpose of the Mishkan, the purpose of God's holy people, because if you flick back to Exodus 19, verse 6, you'll see a purpose there. Actually, God says that he wants his people to be, Exodus 19, verse 6, God says, I want you to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. So how were the people to be holy? They were to be a kingdom, the domain of the king, his realm and his rule, full of priests. And yet it was just the Kohanim, the Levites, which were actually doing the offerings. But God says, I desire that you all will be making offerings to me, actually. And when you get to the New Testament, you see that thread continue, because Peter, the apostle, he writes in his epistle that you are a chosen people, he says. You are a royal priesthood. You're God's special possession. And why was that? Well, Peter says it's so that you can declare God's praises. He called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. The people have to be those that illuminate God's presence. So if we are priests offering sacrifices, much like the priests were there in the New Covenant, we too are offering spiritual sacrifices, though, not actual literal ones. The sacrifices of our lives now are important. How can we increase our zeal for God? Paul, I think when he writes to Timothy, to fan into flame the gifts of God. We're to ignite and keep alight today's sacrifices, today's offering. This fire must be kept burning. Some practical questions for us. Are we carving out some time in our day to read God's word? Are we spending time with the Lord through what he's revealed to us by his written scriptures? Often that's a good time to have that is in the morning, but it may be that you have it on your lunch break if you're at work, or perhaps in bed, or as a couple perhaps if you're married. Spend time increasing your zeal for God, lighting that fire through reading God's revealed word. What about prayer? Praying for others, praying for those that you know and love, praying for Israel and the Jewish people. Are we also engaging in prayer as well? That's a very important principle, isn't it? To keep our fire burning, lifting up others' needs, like incense, prayer going up, and the smoke going up, and the worship going up. What about our lives? Are we stewarding our resources for the Lord? It's not just the spiritual. It was the Greeks, if you remember, they tried to divide the spiritual from the physical. So God was up there on his harp, floating on a cloud. That's a spiritual plane, but the real world, the nitty-gritty earthly world, was no good. But the Hebraic thought brings them all together. So praying first thing in the morning, thanking God that you're alive, is just as important as having a good meal, and thanking God for the meal is just as important as worshipping together. There's even a prayer to thank God when you've gone to the toilet. You know, everything works. Thank you, Lord. The holistic view of prayer and worship. And that includes how we steward our time and our resources, our money, and the things we have, our homes. This is why you often see in Paul's letters, he instructs them, be hospitable, serve one another in love. That is also how we can fuel the fire of our zeal for God. There are many different ways, more than we can really detail today. But if we just go back to our passage in Leviticus, the key is actually to keep the fire burning. The fire on the altar, it shall be kept burning. It must not be extinguished. It's a continual fire by these Kohanim, by these priests. And the fat on the offering, the portions of the peace offering on the altar, kept burning continuously, never extinguished. So that's just a little thought that we can draw from this book of Leviticus this week, from those chapters. Let's keep our fires burning, friends. And may that be the case every morning and every day. I'll see you in the next Reflect. God bless.